Good evening,
Right.
everybody. Welcome to the Richmond Art Gallery's Artist Salon. My name's Kathy Tycholis. I'm the Richmond Art Gallery's Education and Public Programs Coordinator. So I'll be hosting tonight and monitoring all your questions from tonight. I'm pleased to welcome my guests tonight. We have artist Carolyn Ming Ho, curator Makiko Hara, and gallery director Shaun Dacey. So they'll all be here to talk about their involvement with the curatorial project Pacific Crossings and Carolyn's recent artist residency in Japan. So before I introduce my guests, I just want to introduce the salon overall and some Zoom basics. So for those of you new to the salon, it is a monthly free program. It happens on the last Wednesday of every month from February to November. And it is a series really made for visual artists to offer you a mix of professional development tips and inspiration to keep on making your work and growing in your art practice. The session is being recorded tonight. It will be available for viewing at a later date on the Richmond Art Gallery's website, as well as our YouTube channel. And it will include English captions with that as well. And once it's online, it will include any resources that might have been mentioned throughout tonight's talk or any links or websites. We'll throw that up on the YouTube channel as well. And in connection to the Artist Salon program, we also manage the Richmond Art Gallery's Artist Salon Facebook group. This is a private group just for artists and curators in the Lower Mainland. I post regularly on there with opportunities for artist calls, professional development opportunities, local arts events, but it's also a space for you out there if you want to post your arts events to our community of artists in the Lower Mainland. And you can find out more about that as well on the Richmond Art Gallery website, which I have posted up on the chat. I just want to introduce our guest tonight. I thought this topic of international residencies would be great for our usual audience of artists, just to hear some firsthand experience of what to expect from an artist's point of view, but also from the curators who coordinated the project. So definitely feel free to ask your questions with either viewpoint, whether it's artist or curator. And I'm sure you'll gain insight into sort of both sides of what goes into an international residency. So I'm just going to introduce them by reading sort of their shortened bios, just to refresh your memory. So first we have Carolyn Ming Ho, a Vancouver-based interdisciplinary artist working with video, performance, multimedia installation, sculpture, and collage. Her work draws on existential themes as a means to examine formal and conceptual ideas around screen culture, technology, performativity, and the body. She's exhibited in solo shows across Canada, including art museums and galleries in Calgary, Toronto, Montreal, and Halifax, as well as having her work screened in various film and performance festivals in Canada, the US, and France. And Carolyn just completed the first Pacific Crossings art residency in Tokyo, Japan this past fall, and she'll be sharing her experiences with us tonight. So welcome, Carolyn. And before Carolyn presents what her residency experience was like, we'll hear about Pacific Crossings and what it is from Makiko Hara and Shaun Dacey. Makiko is an independent curator, lecturer, writer, art and cultural consultant, and co-founder of Pacific Crossings, which is based in Vancouver, BC. From 2007 to 2013, she was the chief curator and deputy director of Center A, the Vancouver International Center for Contemporary Asian Art. And she has worked with many visual artists on a variety of projects as an independent curator across Canada and Japan. She was appointed to the Advisory on International Exchange Center at the Akita University of Art in Akita, Japan from 2017 to 2020. She founded My Kitchen Anthropology Museum in 2020 in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic lockdown and received the Alvin Belkind Curators Prize in 2020. Welcome, Makiko. And then we have Shaun Dacey, director at the Richmond Art Gallery, which is in Richmond, BC. Since working at the gallery from fall of 2016, Shaun has curated numerous exhibitions considering the specific histories and cultural context of Richmond with artists such as Karen Tam, John Sasaki, and Brendan Fernandez. Previous to that, he was a curator at the Contemporary Art Gallery in Vancouver, where he produced a range of exhibitions, educational initiatives, and offsite projects. And he also developed the KEG Gerard Marina Fieldhouse studio residency program, nurturing expansive projects with many different artists. So welcome, Shaun. So I will now fade into the background, let my guests take over, and I will be monitoring your questions within the chat. So definitely feel free to throw up your questions anytime throughout. Each of them will do a short presentation, and then we'll get to the Q&A portion. So I will leave you all now and let you take it away.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me for this talk at Artist Salon. And I'm really happy that finally, after 5 months since we come back, it's a little bit overdue, but we wanted to talk about our experience in Japan and Tokyo and Nagoya, and also about this fast launching international exchange programs between Pacific Crossing and Art Center ongoing. So I think I briefly talk about Pacific Crossing, but maybe Shaun can give more ideas. Well, like we described already in the invitation. So the Pacific Crossing, it started in about 2018, which I feel like a really long ago. And then since then, that it been changed a lot. So that's also we're gonna talk later. But the ideas with presently we are it's a curatorial initiative of 5 members right now with Shaun and Allison Collins and Jesse Birch from the Nanaimo Art Gallery and Henry Heng Lu, who recently just got a new work at new positions at the Chinese Art Museum. So I'm very happy for him. And myself, 5 of us, is kind of sharing interesting ideas about the kind of culture networking, art networking across the Pacific. So it's a kind of a curatorial initiative to develop, to link with Vancouver and BC to the rest of the across the oceans in more kind of international global conversation about art community and networking, because we feel kind of far in the distance, and but it's a lot of common, or like many immigrants or like many cultural diversity people here. It's I think it's more interesting to kind of create a more international dialogue. And in order to do that, we started with inviting a guest researcher in the first years, and then develop different kind of exchange formats. Most last couple of years was mostly in Zoom conversation, but in the first year was more kind of inviting guests to stay and research and meeting and a studio visit. So one of them, that's the guest host that we hosted in 2019, was Nozomu Ogawa, who was the director of Art Center Ongoing, which is very interesting, unique organizations founded by him, Ogawa, in 2008 in Tokyo, in the suburb of Tokyo. But it's become a kind of most important artist community hub over the years, and especially doing a lot of, and since 2013, they organize a lot of international residency exchange with mostly in Southeast Asia or Asia, and then recently with more like Europe. So, and as an independent curator, after working at Center A, I work a lot with the Cross Pacific Commission project, and I thought how I in Southeast Asia and in Japan, and it was very active community, more in networking with the different country. And I thought that's how we as like artists in BC, art community in BC, can engage with that kind of a networks that's it's really active now. And that's one of the example was like last year's documentary One Lupa was very much emerged from that kind of exchange. And it's so I was with a member of Pacific Crossing, we try to, strategize different things. And so this exchange, this residency exchange come from Nozomu, the art center ongoing, that they wanted to establish with us about kind of more like a irregular exchange program. And we have some resources from the provincial and federal government, so that we decide, okay, well, let's start exchange, like a residency exchange. And then we did the open call in 2019, I believe. And then that's Caroline's project was very interesting. And among the members, we decided, okay, we want to support that project. So then we were planned to send her in the spring of 2020. It was like Shaun and Caroline supposed to go in March of 2020, where that's the COVID hit. So it was just at the very last minutes that we have to cancel, and then we're waiting of opportunities. And then finally, that there's a spot last summer, we got the rumor that Japan's entry restriction will be lifted eventually. So that we kind of hoping, okay, let's try do it in this fall spot. And so, but it was challenging. I think Caroline's going to reflect what's the, what's her expectation and how it go, and then what's the kind of a challenge, or like kind of for us to get feedback, how we can restructure or revise to make it more productive. And so, but we decided to go in different schedule, but the Caroline stay about a month, I think. And then also we decided to combine with her visit, stay in Tokyo with ongoing, but also we visited Aichi Triennale, which was happening. And then also networking with Nagoya's, that Aichi Triennale was happening in Nagoya and in the city around. It was the biggest kind of international exhibition, but in the same times we hosted by the MAT Nagoya, which is another alternative organizations that one is, unlike ongoing, it was more funded by the government, but they are more like they help us accommodation and then meet with a local artist and things like that. So overall, like and it was interesting challenge during the COVID, and we kind of wanted to get more sense and as a from the artist how she feel and things. Maybe I stop at here.
I can just add a few things before we pass that on to Carrie Lynn. Yeah, I'm just adding to what Makiko said. I think for the idea of Pacific Crossings, the group of us, I run Richmond Art Gallery, which is centered in a predominantly Asian community, and just these long connections to Asia, but really feeling, and across the Pacific, but really feeling within the art world context or the visual arts context. Many of our colleagues, when they do a residency or go overseas, they go to Europe, they go to Berlin. And we were just interested in building stronger connections to Asia. And Makiko, with her experience, originally from Japan and her connections there, and her background in working on residencies, on hosting Canadian artists in the past, Henry Lu and his connections with China, Allison Collins and her research in Southeast Asia, Makiko as well, and also Jessie Birch, who is currently in Japan. And you should check out Nanaimo Art Gallery's Instagram page, because you can check out what he's up to on his own little residency through Pacific Crossings. We are interested in developing these connections and creating opportunities for curators and artists to learn and make and have conversations And I think for us running organizations, there is an entrepreneurial spirit, I'm going to say, within Asian art cultures. And I was just wowed visiting Japan and visiting these spaces that are art galleries, cafe, bars, community centers that really get no public funding. And so I think for us, it's also to learn about alternative ways of existing and building this dialogue together. So I think for us, this is a very itinerant and ongoing project that we're just building on. And for good or for bad, Carrie Lynn was our guinea pig. And we're so happy, and thank you so much, Carrie Lynn, for taking on this opportunity and being hosted by Art Center Ongoing and having this adventure in Japan. But it's great. I think really great for Artist Salon tonight is for Carrie Lynn just to share her experience on going on a residency to a foreign country, to a culture that is not hers, to a language that she does not speak, and her experiences. I know she was going there with an idea of doing research, and that was developed before COVID. But I think it was a really interesting being there with her in the moment. It was a really exciting time to get out of our context and our post-COVID context and experience a different situation and to meet some really amazing artists and curators. So maybe I'll leave it there for now and pass it over to Carrie Lynn to share with us a little bit about her experience as an artist. Thanks.
Thanks, Shaun. And thanks, Makiko. Thank you, Richmond Art Gallery, for hosting this. I think, yeah, there's a lot to talk about, and obviously probably won't fit it all in, but hopefully we'll kind of get a sense of the flavor of what it was at the time. And hopefully I can share some insights as to what that experience was, what some of the challenges were, things I learned along the way, because I think it also is, of course, a learning process at the end of the day. But, you know, it was an amazing experience, I have to say, despite all the challenges and expectations and COVID. I did have an amazing time, and you know, a theme in the talk today that I'm about to give is kind of about paradoxes and embracing paradox. So and I think in traveling and in doing this residency, I think, you know, and doing any international residency, you're always going to be faced with these kinds of paradoxes of like, these things are really amazing, and then you're like, but I can't navigate through this other thing, and it's super, super frustrating. So, you know, I think the whole experience is also just about embracing both sides of the coin, essentially. So I'm going to share my screen. The residency was predominantly in Tokyo and at Art Center Ongoing. So to give myself and the audience a bit of a structure here, I'll start by talking about the residency at Ongoing, and I'll show some photos, and then I'll go into the questions that I had for my research while there, or at least my intentions initially. And then after that, I'll go into just what I actually found, because oftentimes the things that you intend or the questions you put forward are not, in fact, the things that you get. So it's kind of about what I took away from the experience, as well as like what informed my practice. And then the last part, I'll talk about my thoughts and some advice moving forward, for both Pacific Crossings or anyone who's kind of interested in this kind of residency, especially Japan. So to start off, this is a clip of kind of some of the art that Art Center Ongoing presents as part of its space. It feels like a very youthful space, very do-it-yourself. It is very much artist-run culture in the best possible sense, in that it's kind of like this hub for, performances, dancers, choreographers. While I was there, there was a performance festival that they were hosting, where there was also music, stand-up comedy. So this, if you can get a sense of the layout, is kind of, and as Shaun said, a lot of these spaces in Tokyo, especially where space is kind of scarce, they usually have like a cafe or a restaurant that they run in tandem with the gallery space. And at Art Center Ongoing, in this case, they had a cafe and a restaurant at the bottom, where these two dancers are kind of on the right here. This is kind of like their cafe space, and then upstairs is the gallery space. So while I was there, I had an exhibition of my work, which was titled Butterfly Dreams, and it was a very short run, but I was really glad that I had the opportunity to show my work while I was there. It allowed me to kind of get a sense of, what the audience thought. Like, it's always difficult to know how your work is going to be read in a different context, especially culturally. So I think, this work in particular was in process, and I am kind of trying to shift my thinking around, always presenting, work that is completely, perfect in a way, and instead trying to be okay with putting things out there that may not be so conclusive in certain ways. So this piece, I was thinking a lot about Taoist parables, and the work is based on a Taoist parable about a philosopher who dreams he's a butterfly, but when he wakes up, he's not sure if he's a philosopher dreaming about a butterfly or a butterfly dreaming that he's a philosopher. And so this kind of indeterminate space is a kind of metaphor for this digital world that we kind of live in, where we're not sure if the dream is real or not. And so some of the themes I've been working on, some of the aesthetics, I'll talk about later. So here are some research questions that I had during my residency, at least when I started. So my work is really very much about technology and our feelings towards technology. And initially, the research was about emotional AI, or affective computing, which is basically the way technology is used to read human emotions, which is becoming obviously a thing where, refrigerators can kind of sense, the weather and our mood, and they recommend recipes for whatever mood we're in. This is, there's a lot of money and research going towards the idea of technology being able to read us. And so initially that was my research, but I've kind of came to a broader sense of questions while I was there. And some of these questions are, what were the attitudes like in Japan towards smart technology in general? Optimism, fear, what fantasies, technological desires drive, oops, sorry, my mouse pad, I keep scrolling forward. What fantasies, technological desires drive this innovation of technology? And what conditions compel us to look towards the artificial rather than the real? And is using technology in this way the most obvious solution to emotional inequity? Or is it in fact a placebo or a proxy to economic and social problems that are becoming increasingly difficult to fix? I know that these are like really big questions, but generally speaking, I kind of wanted to also think about the differences between Western and perhaps Eastern ways of thinking around technology. And I know that it's not a binary, but at the same time, you know, culturally, there are different ways of thinking about objects and tools in general in different cultural contexts. And especially in the West, where there is this real fear and existential threat around things like AI. And I think that there's like also a very deep anxiety at the moment with technology and where it's going, particularly in terms of job loss and like things like AI taking over. Like these are obviously real problems and real concerns, but I was curious if these kinds of sentiments were felt in another place where technology is actually really prominent in their lives, in their daily lives. So this next section is called What I Found and Learned Instead. So those are the questions I put out, but as these things go, you don't always get what you ask for. And also given the framework of COVID and also not having a ton of time between when the borders opened and buying a ticket and getting there, to have the time to kind of figure out what the plan was. I, you know, thought about the idea that maybe it's better to also like broaden this idea of technology and what is digital and how are these digital systems kind of inserted in this other culture in their daily lives. So one of the things that I found really interesting about Japan is that on the one hand, Japanese society is quite traditional and is quite conservative. Yet, at the same time, it is incredibly futuristic and more advanced than I would say most other countries. So what I found was that Japanese culture is very efficient, but efficiency is a paradox because while there's these amazing things like the trains run on time, like to the minute, to the second almost, and they're incredibly precise, it seems like, you know, time is very important to them because there's so little of it. And so essentially everything is so nicely packaged and incredibly perfect. Like these grapes I've never seen more beautiful grapes in my life than the grapes in Japan. And but the downside to this is that we don't see the excess. Everything is so perfectly packaged that we just see, like, you know, somebody mentioned when I was there that you can't get like a whole chicken because everything is everything's all cut up and it's all like perfectly packaged, but you can't get a whole chicken. And so I thought about this a lot especially after coming back from it. And it became sort of clear to me that when something becomes so efficient, it also becomes a form of automation. And Japanese society is just so geared towards automation that in so many ways it's incredibly futuristic. Like if you look at these photos, this is what it's like. It's like if I imagine what the future was like, I would probably see this. It's so like neatly organized and it's all prepackaged and it's perfectly portioned and everything is and it tastes really great. And there's a fluidity to this kind of automation and a system of flow when a system like this works so well. But what I found that was interesting is that it kind of loses its humanity in a way, because, there's no mess. And sometimes the paradox of life is that messiness is a productive thing too. Another example is that this is a bowl of ramen at this really amazing chain called Ichiren. And so when you go to eat there, you put your money into like a machine, and in Japan, there's all these like machines, and you get a ticket, and then you sit down and you basically write down your preferences, and somebody grabs the ticket, but you never see their face. It just like is like a sliding door that opens, and they take your ticket and then it opens again, and then your bowl of ramen is presented in front of you. So literally you don't see anyone, and you don't have to talk to anyone. And if you look at the slide on the next side, they also have like these kind of wooden tickets that if you don't want to talk to anyone, you can just put it out there to let them know what it is that you are complaining about. Like, it's noisy. So it's really interesting because like in this situation too, I realized that like this like whole system is automated to the point where you don't see anyone anymore, and you're literally alone with your bowl of soup, which at times I feel like I can kind of get behind that, but at the same time, it's there's something kind of dehumanizing about that too. So something interesting to think about, as well as like the culture of the train system is so efficient, but nobody, like, they deter there being excessive noise or too much talking, or putting your phone or playing something on your phone like out loud with the speakers on. So my question became like, what do we lose and what do we gain in these sorts of efficiencies? Yeah. And so the other interesting thing I came across in Japan was this idea of fantasy and fictosexuality, which, I talked about it with Shaun and Makiko. I can't remember what your friend's name was who made this pillow, but what I found to be really interesting about this is that there's like this broader acceptance of like this outward projection of desire, either through objects or images, and this notion of like a fictosexuality where and people can be attracted to like fictitious characters. And so here's an object that I've been wanting to see in real life, and so I finally saw one in Tokyo, which is essentially this is a hologram that works as like your assistant, but a lot of men actually buy this as like a companion to like as somebody to live with. And the whole series behind this hologram is that it's called the Living With series, so that you can live with your favorite like anime character, and she can also like turn the lights on for you. You can have a conversation with her. She can send you text messages at work, you know. So in many ways, a lot of people are, you know, they do have a kind of relationship to these objects because they genuinely interact with them. But then there's also these like, you know, these sort of outward kind of fantasy images just circulating around, you know, all of Japan, really. And that is considered to be the norm. And then this is this band, a girl band or a girl group called AKB48. And so I just filmed that from my television one night when I was watching TV. And but what's interesting about AKB48 is that they're this really long running girl band that like has like this rotating cast of girl bands. So like there's probably like over 100 of them out there, and they kind of just rotate. And if they get too old, they just like replace them with another woman. But what's interesting about that is also this idea of like, you know, like they're kind of like these digital avatars, right? Where it's like they replace one another. You're not really sure who you're going to see next. And yeah, it's kind of interesting that, you know, this idea of like this rotating girl band is like an accepted thing. Oops. Yeah, and then also like this idea of fiction, fantasy, real, all blurring into one, because in a way it feels like in Japan there's an acceptance of a kind of play around fantasy, like playing out your fantasy in the real that maybe we don't do so much in North America. Yeah. And then there's all these like host bars and hostess bars in Japan where you can go and essentially have a drink and have somebody, either a man or a woman, flatter you and like have conversation with you. But what's interesting about these bars is that they actually, for a lot of people who go to these bars and who are customers, they maintain like a sort of relationship with their, I guess, the host or the hostess that they like. And so there's this kind of fictional, like ongoing relationship, this kind of fictional play that plays out in reality, but it is a fiction. So yeah, it's an interesting way to think about relationships too, because it's like more broadly accepted to be in this space of play than the real. And so it is, yeah, I find it to be really interesting. And I obviously don't know, maybe not going to use a host and hostess bar in my work, but it's just an interesting thing to think about, how this imaginary space opens up. And then like if we're allowed to play within these fictional worlds, like worlds and worlds will open up for you in this way. And I also don't think that is unlike a digital world that we live in, where you know, fiction can play out in all these different platforms and all these different spaces and interfaces. And this is just a different interface for love, or even the play of love, or, you know, real or not, it's still an interesting space. And then these were just some aesthetic things that I saw, because in my video that I showed earlier, I'm really interested in this kind of non-Newtonian fluid aesthetic going on right now, which I also think that we're kind of subjected to a lot, because with all this like thought about like, you know, climate change and icebergs melting, and but also like with Instagram videos like slime culture, there is this kind of pull towards this kind of non-Newtonian fluid, which in its scientific way doesn't behave like a fluid, because it's all about stress and the way stress changes the shape of something. And so anyways, I saw a lot of like, you know, with the absence of having, you know, being able to talk to scientists necessarily, I did aesthetically find some things that were really interesting, that I probably would not have seen here. And then finally, so after a month of being in Tokyo and reaching out to a number of scientists and people who work in tech, Nozomu actually put me in touch with this project here called the Internet of Brains. And it's gonna sound really crazy and sci-fi, but this is actually really happening. So basically, the Internet of Brains is being funded by the Japanese Science and Technology Agency. And what it aims to do is to achieve mind-to-mind communication through both non-invasive and invasive means by 2050. So basically, this project is all about creating direct mind-to-mind communication. So like, if you think about ESP, this is kind of what they're trying to develop. So I talked to the project director, or the director of this project, and he agreed to sit down with me for a chat and an interview. And I found out some really interesting things, which are also a little bit scary, but at the same time, really interesting. So the Internet of Brains not only is trying to do this kind of mind-to-mind communication, there are kind of like these three branches. The mind-to-mind communication is this one, where they're trying to create a direct link between two brains through some kind of interface here, where you can kind of project your thoughts and feelings. So while it's not totally affected technology, the hope for them is to feel that by creating this directness to another person, you're able to feel them and understand them at a deeper level. The other part of this project is called Brain Assistant, and they're trying to develop a technology to help patients, who have lost the use of their limbs and reconnect their brain to their body in a way that allows them to have their body be more functioning, which is really great. And is also, as I found out, what Japanese technology is mostly sort of known for is their sort of their prosthetics, and they're developing technology that for patients and stuff like that. And the third is that, like, in their mind and in the Japanese government's mind, we're gonna be in a world like Meta. It's like a metaverse similar to Meta, where it's we're going to be in a world where we're interacting in this virtual space as avatars, and then there's also going to be these kinds of sentient beings in this world, and that's the world we're going to operate within the next like 20 years or so. These are all predictions, but but who knows? I mean, this is what they're working towards. So I had a really good, really interesting and very sci-fi conversation with this scientist who's also he's a neurologist as well. And then I met an artist who put me in touch with this online journal. And so I did have a conversation with him that I'm publishing for this online journal called UN Art, which is based out of Shanghai. And it's not out yet. I think it's going to come out in March sometime, so next month. But I'll encourage you guys to check it out if you are interested. But we did have some really interesting things to talk about, and this is kind of, a little bit of a taste of it. My question was, how do you think this technology will change the nature of relationships between the not so human? Oops, sorry, again, my mouse. Well, ideally with the IOB, we can communicate directly through the brain. The hope is that we would have a deeper understanding of other people. At the same time, I think that artificial intelligence will eventually start coexisting with human society. Reproducing physical appearance may be difficult, but even now as we speak online, you could be an avatar. At some point, we won't be able to tell whether we're talking to a real human. We will meet more AIs that can have human-like conversation. Probably many of us will believe they may have consciousness, non-human, human identities. Anyways, I'm going to skip forward a bit and go into just advice and general thoughts. So about residencies in general. So, well, I learned a lot and I gained a lot from this experience. There were also a lot of challenges in this process as well. My first piece of advice is always inquire in detail about your live-work situation, and to make sure that place can accommodate your studio practice. In my case, like, I had a desk and a bed, but the work-live situation was very small and tight, and there was a lot of construction nearby, which affected my ability to work. So I think that moving forward, you should always discuss in detail and for yourself to ask yourself, what is a productive space when traveling? Because that's also the other thing, is that, like, maybe you don't want to stay in one place. What does that look like? The other thing is consider resources of a gallery or space. Like, what kind of support can they give you? So not all galleries and not all spaces have the same, they cannot offer all the same things. So I think for me, it'd be like, what would be important to you to accomplish the work or the research that you intend? Do you need space? Is space important to you? Or do you need just a desk space? Can you work digitally? Or maybe you need more contacts, and maybe, you need more support on that end. So having a sense of what you need and what a gallery can offer you also, which is like ongoing, because there's such an artist-run kind of space and a very DIY space as well, they are really stretched resource-wise sometimes. And I think that can be really hard if you're trying to accomplish something and that's not something that they can give you. And that sort of follows up with what are your needs to get the work or the research accomplished. In Japan especially, I think what I encountered that was challenging was that access can be limited as a foreigner. So, like, some places are a little bit more, open to foreigners, but I think that, in Japan, it can be a much more closed society sometimes. So you don't always know who to ask, where to ask, and perhaps language is sometimes also a barrier. because a lot of people don't speak English there, and not that they should, but just that, like, these sort of things get lost in translation. It might be good to have an intermediary contact or someone in the community to help you put you in touch with people. In some ways, Makiko was that for me and us on this trip. But, in a place like Japan, it's where access can be limited. It's important to have those kinds of people who can kind of bring you into the fold or give you information as to what are the good spaces to visit, or who might be, interested in your practice, stuff like that. And then also, like, more time and effort on organizations, on the organization's part, to set up the residency for success. So, like, maybe a little bit more pre-work on, making those connections beforehand, which leads me to the next one, which is contact people 1 month or more in advance. Most of my contacts in Japan wanted to meet basically literally while I was leaving. And so I think I think that might also be cultural too, where, the people don't get back to you maybe as quickly as other places do, but it was something that was, like, a bit frustrating, where I had contacted them weeks ago and they didn't get back to me. And I was talking to a lot of people also who also said the same thing. Anyways, exhibition length was a bit short for the amount of time it took to put the show on, but those are just practicalities, but also to stay flexible, because customs and formalities can be challenging to navigate sometimes. Anyways, I know I've gone over, but maybe I can now go into Q&A with you guys.
Thanks, Carolyn. Definitely, people, if you have questions, please throw them up in the chat and we can get to them. I did have a few questions both for Shaun and Makiko and for Carolyn. So maybe for Makiko and Shaun, what was it about Carolyn's proposal that made you think she'd be a good fit for this residency? And I'm just thinking in terms of, there was other artists applying for something similar. Like, what was it that kind of grabbed your attention for this project?
I can start and maybe Makiko will add, but it wasn't decided by really by us or just us. So Nozomu from Art Center Ongoing had completed a research trip here before and met many artists, and so it was really about finding a practice that they felt had a crossover or fit, and Carolyn's research was really about still connecting. Even it's nice to hear what she learned through her experience, but it was kind of related to those ideas around AI, and she had some ambitious ideas of connecting with certain universities. And I think as a group, it felt overall that there was a nice kinship between her practice and the potential of that residency. So it's really nice to hear that she did make headway, and maybe when Carolyn has a chance to speak, it'd be interesting to hear whether the research that she completed in Japan, whether that's leading to some new work or not. But maybe Makiko wants to add to that question as well that I just answered.
Yeah, well, thank you, Caroline, to share what you have really discovered, and also very productive feedback. That's sorry about that kind of limit and a challenging kind of context that we try to do it in a very almost like last minute, and then adds the conditions that I think we as the Pacific Crossings need to be revised and then change based on this feedback. It was great, but also I was very inspired that how you found a kind of out of that your immediate research subject that you originally proposed, because well, it's time passed and then condition change. But like the originally that we got probably about 20 application or so, but your research proposal was most kind of very specific, and then very much about that could happen in Tokyo, and many artists or like culture peoples are sharing a similar interest in AI, or those technology and change how that we human cohabit and things. So I saw that's it was the most fit to the ideas of exchange originally. But I was very inspired again that as I have done many like inviting BC artists like Cindy Mochizuki, Kan Lee, and Walter Scott, who used to be here, to Japan. And they had ideas, but it's always been very shifted and discover something completely unexpected, and then also it's cultural experience really, I think it's important. And so I was very appreciated that you being open and flexible, and then kind of find something useful for yourself.
I just want to add something. I think there's really, having run a residency program and spoke with many artists about residencies, I think there's a real push and pull. Like there's a more cookie cutter, huge residency programs, BAM Center, ISCP. You get into this program, you're given your like little box to work in. They like organize trips for you. It's very procedural. And I think in Pacific Crossings, we were more interested in being more, well, we have a lack of funding, but also because of that, we're able to be a bit more nimble and fluid in how we do things, and more relationship based. And of course, it's emotional work. And running the residency for the Contemporary Art Gallery, it was a lot of emotional labor hosting artists. But I think there's pros and cons to all these different types of residencies. And this is a specific one. And we've learned so much from Carrie Lynn's experience. And it's great for her to share those responses. Yeah.
Thanks. And we do have some questions in the chat, I think mostly for Carrie Lynn. So from Shanna, was your residency more process-based or product-based? And drawing from this residency, what would you pursue for your next one, or how would you approach it differently?
That's a great question. So definitely more process-based, I would say. A lot of it was kind of being open to what I would find while I was there, because it is so culturally different than what I'm used to. And my work is very narrative based. So it was also about like, what are these narrative openings that I can find in this other space that I wouldn't normally encounter in North America? In terms of what I would do different, I would say I would try to get in touch with people much more in advance, I think. And of course, you don't know this until you get there. And also there was COVID. So we had to leave pretty soon after that, but after the border restrictions were lifted. But from a lot of other artists who are there, who are also doing either residencies or doing research there, they also said the same thing, which was that people didn't get back to them as soon as they thought they would. And so essentially you run out of time. So if there was any way to kind of push making those connections sooner rather than later, But we live in this great world where we have Zoom. So so I was able to still connect with like the Internet of Brains. I could still pursue that area of research after the residency ended. And in fact, both of my conversations with him and were once the residency ended.
That kind of was leading to the question I was going to ask earlier, was just, as an artist, like, how do you prepare for this? Because I mean, you had your idea going in, but you're going to a completely new place, especially if it's a place where you don't speak the language. You don't know what to expect. Like, how much preparation really can you do as an artist going to someplace new?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. And if it was a different kind of residency, like, where there was a studio space where I was making work, physical work, I think it would be different. But I think that's the thing about staying flexible, is like you kind of just have to be open to the possibilities of failure and also your world opening up in other ways. Like, we did try to get into these host bars. Like, I met another artist from Germany and he and I were trying to get in, but they wouldn't allow foreigners in because it's not like they don't make any money from foreigners, because they want repeat customers. But even just that experience of trying to like get in and having these kind of explorations in another culture was enlightening. Yeah. And I think that, you just kind of have to be open to the experience, for better, for worse,
Go ahead, Makiko.
Can I ask a question, Caroline?
Yeah.
I think for our kind of how the device of the Pacific Crossing, I'm just wondering, do you think it's good for you to come back and then develop the project? I mean, like, quite often that's, especially when I work with Cindy Mochizuki, who we started one residency, but that's bring back more research and then bring back the ideas to develop, so that we spend 6 years at the end to develop one project overall. Like, it's not necessarily with the ongoing, but it's like in a different formats. That's is that useful for you, or like in general for the artist, you think? Because
Yeah, I do think that it is, because like as we were talking about before, like there wasn't enough time, I don't think, I think that it wasn't until I got to the end of the residency I was like, okay, these are like even more things I want to pursue. But you run out of time, because the first half of your residency in a lot of ways is just navigating, like trying to figure out like, okay, how do I take the subway, and where are these spaces? Like, that's the other thing, is you don't know where things are. And so by the time you reach the end of your residency, you're like, oh, well, there's all these places I want to see that I don't have time now. Or there's like an organization that does like wearable prosthetics. And I was thinking like, and they allow people to come in, but it was too late. I found about it too late, and it required like a train ride and stuff like that. And so, it's not always so easy when you're first there figuring it out. But now that I've been, it's like easier somehow to see where I would go next time and how these sort of different avenues would pursue.
Great.
Yeah.
And you have a comment from Shaun in the chat. He would like to hear more about the artwork you presented in your exhibition, Carolyn.
Yeah, sure. So the work is called Butterfly Dreams, and so like I had mentioned in the talk, it's based on this Taoist parable, and I've been really interested in this idea of like Eastern philosophy as a vehicle to kind of think about technology that isn't so a sort of Western way of thinking. And I could go on about how Western mythology, Western philosophy has so much actually influenced technology and our understanding of technology. But the work is essentially a single channel installation, and the main characters are these two butterflies, and they're kind of floating around these kind of melting landscapes, and they're talking about like, you know, the nature of reality, but also like the sensations and the feelings of things, the materiality of, you know, the real world potentially just kind of the materiality of it kind of disappearing somehow. So I'm really interested in emotions as well, like feelings that arise. And I do think that like, you know, my theory is that because we're inundated with so many images now, and especially images that involve this kind of melting or like this new non-Newtonian fluidity. So like, for example, like slime videos are a perfect example where you see, I don't know, well, and this might be my feed, obviously, because the algorithms are so different for everyone. But in my feed, you know, like you have like there's all these like textural material like videos now. And then there was like this whole jelly cake phenomenon a couple years ago where it's just like this notion of materiality feels a little different. And so I am interested in those kinds of aesthetics also kind of being brought into the work. I know it doesn't totally explain the work. You'll just have to see it. But at the same time, those are kind of like the little bits of pieces that I'm trying to talk about in the work.
Great. We have one last question from Dorothy. Just how long were you in Japan? And I'll add to that is how long do you think you would need in Japan? Like if this was your ideal residency?
I think I was in Japan for 5 weeks in total. And then ideally, I think I would spend like 3 months there, because that's enough time to sort of get acquainted, maybe make those contacts that you need to make, because people, it's a thing in Japan, I think, where people don't necessarily get back to you right away. And then another month to kind of like, you know, pursue other things and to get all your images. And if I wanted to do some filming, you know, that would be a good amount of time to plan. Because it is hard to like even film something because you just don't know where anything is in the first few weeks. So so that I would say like a good few months would be great, ideally. Yeah.
Okay, great. I don't see any other questions in the chat. I don't know if any of our panel had any other last questions. Shaun?
I just wanted to say a few thoughts that come to mind. Is yeah, this is a very specific itinerant project, and you know, Pacific Crossings came together through grants and through just a group of people getting together. So I do want to, you know, something I'm learning a lot through these connections we're building and through the relationships we're cultivating with people like Nozomu and other curators and organizations and artists in Asia and in other parts of the Pacific, is an entrepreneurial spirit, that we're not really waiting for big institutions to host us for residencies. You know, we are very grassroots and creating opportunities and creating conversations. And I just want to instill that to everyone listening, like not to wait around, that, you know, if you're in Canada, there is funding, there is support to build your own adventure, to create your own residency, and to make your own connections. And people like Makiko and Carrie Lynn really speak to that. tenacity to do things and make them work and cultivate projects. And for us at Pacific Crossings, you know, these relationships are, as Makiko brought up, are ongoing and developing over time. And so Art Center Ongoing is one partner that we like to work with, and there are others kind of coming together. So I do like that idea of long-term relationships, and you know, even with artists like Carrie Lynn, you know, it's like building our community of Pacific Crossings. So yeah, so keep following. More things are coming down the pipe with Pacific Crossings. Yeah, we're very excited and so happy to finally get to start doing projects in Asia and hopefully bring more people overseas to Vancouver and the Lower Mainland as well. So yeah, thanks for tonight.
Great.
Yeah, I also want to thank you. And it was just, I think it's really a lot of learning process, but I think it's really important to keep doing it and, you know, try and errors and to makes this exchange, because it's really going through something that's learning something unknown, and it's also that I want to continue to bring in the Asian artists here and things to how to develop all those experience to share, to develop something more in the futures. I really appreciated that the Caroline's very productive feedback, and but also really inspired that the things that she discovers going to be into her new works and things. So, but yeah, we will continue, and then more to come, I think.
Great. Well, that's good to hear. So for everyone out there, stay tuned. More Pacific Crossings to come. And I think, you know, it'd be great to have you back, or to maybe host another time when you have an artist from the Pacific coming to visit. We could host another talk with them or something like that, so that we could, you know, have more of a sharing and learning conversation again. I think these conversations are great for artists and for the curators to have together, to each kind of connect that way. That leads me to next month. Shameless plug for Artist Salon. We're having our first social, and it will be with other organizations, mainly in Richmond, but artists from all over the Lower Mainland are welcome to join us. It's really to hear what we're all doing and what organizations are doing, and how we can kind of all connect with each other and help each other as we continue making artwork. So next month we'll be meeting in the gallery on March 29th. I hope you can join us. Otherwise, I want to really thank all my guests tonight, and for everyone that joined us online. Thank you for supporting the Artist Salon. Thank you for a really great conversation tonight. And I hope I will see you again next month or online. All right, take care, everybody. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.